A big thank you to Maria Scrimenti for joining us today. This was an awesome conversation about making peace with food and making peace with our bodies. For many of us, it's an ongoing, sometimes lifetime journey. Hello. So I would love to have you, introduce yourself and everything. But before we do that, I want to just jump right into kind of a meaty question with you to kick things off. Thinker Blue really serves, parents and caregivers who are working to raise children outside of restrictive gender stereotypes. And so most feminist parents are pretty aware that body image is, an ongoing issue, and they're pretty aware of diet culture and the unrealistic standards for bodies. But one of the most difficult things I hear from parents is, and really so many people, is dropping food rules,
Mm.
that they're just so ingrained in us and that they're really hard to get rid of. So what would you say to that?
They are hard to get rid of. And I have a lot of compassion for that. And food rules make us feel like we have some sense of control. And so when we release some of those food rules, it feels kind of out of control. So I think something that is really helpful for my clients is to realize that ultimately letting go of food rules is what's going to put you back in charge around food, even though it doesn't feel like that at first. So if you're experiencing
Yes.
fear, I totally validate that. It is scary. What do you need to take care of yourself as you're healing your relationship with food? How can you take care of yourself a little extra? Do you need support? Most people do require some type of support as they're letting go of food rules because, like you said, Catherine, it's so deeply ingrained and it takes time. Be patient. Don't try to overhaul your entire relationship with food all at one time. I would
Mhm.
say like maybe start with a couple of those food rules and see how you could slowly transition into a more
Mhm.
intuitive relationship with food. But
Right.
yeah, it's hard. I mean, maybe realize too that those rules were never really meant for you. Like those cookie cutter rules don't really take into account what your unique body needs. So in the long run, they don't really work for their intended purpose anyhow. So you're better off just trying to kind of make your own rules, DIY it.
Right. Absolutely. And when your clients are, trying to make their own rules, because like something that we often talk about around here, and in, raising body confident kids is trying to help children have that body intuition. And it's hard when sometimes as adults, like we've lost that intuition, right? With all these rules. So how do you suggest when adults are building their own rules, how to, start going about that? Or like what's one step they could take?
Ooh, yeah, good question. And it's different for everybody. So, I mean,
Yeah,
I want everyone to take this with a grain of salt, but
for sure.
maybe I can just throw a couple of ideas and people can pick
Yeah.
and choose what would work for them. But kids can teach
Okay.
us a lot about how to get back to that very peaceful, intuitive relationship with food. So maybe start to notice like what do they do around food? Do they kind of stop when they feel satisfied or when they feel full? Do they ask for food when they're hungry? And how could you allow yourself kind of that same freedom around food, like eating when you do feel hungry, tuning into your own body, letting maybe, I mean, because I don't want it to go from like I'm letting go of external rules and creating my own rules. I think I don't.
Mm,
It's
right.
not necessarily about creating new rules.
Rules. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think maybe tuning into things like hunger, fullness, and satisfaction can be helpful in terms of like you making this an inside job and getting in touch
Yeah.
with your like what your unique body wants and needs. Um, so hunger,
Yep.
fullness, and satisfaction, I think, can be helpful. Um, I don't know. I mean, it is hard to get back to that intuitive relationship with food, but I do think parents are lucky in that they have really good examples in their in their kids.
Definitely. I see that too, where my 5-year-old really stops eating when she's full. And I love seeing it, and I'm thankful that I've, had the tools this whole time to know that that's okay for her to stop and to let her stop,
Yeah.
and to not force her to keep eating, because it's my agenda. So it really is awesome to just kind of sit at mealtime and watch her, the way she's naturally meant to eat. It's such a lesson to all of us.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Catherine. And I think like one of the main rules that this practice of hunger, fullness, satisfaction allows you to release is portion control. You really don't
Yeah,
need portion control when you trust your body to regulate itself and tell you how much it needs, when it needs it, what it wants.
so
That's
true.
freeing, right? To not need portion control.
It is so freeing to eat how much you think you want and stop when you're done. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not about perfection. There's a huge learning curve of learning, at trial and error. How much does your body want? And maybe sometimes we give it a little bit too much, sometimes we give it not enough, but it's all a part of the process. And having that
Mhm.
process thinking of like there are going to be ups and downs, but as long as
Yep.
we can accept that, we will move forward. It's not all or nothing, and there's really no way to mess it up.
Yes. That's great. That's so great. I love that. Um, well, okay, so thank you. I'm going to jump backwards a little. It's just fun to get right into the topic because I know people were waiting for us to start. But now that we're chatting, so tell us a little bit about yourself, Maria. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you in the virtual world, via your Facebook group, and I've had the opportunity to listen to some of your trainings. And I just absolutely love your approach to things, using compassion and empathy and self-kindness. We're so often lacking those, not just words, but those principles in our lives. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about your coaching practice.
I would love to. And thank you for your kind words. Our work is very much aligned, and I am so supportive of everything that you do as well. So, yes, my name is Maria Scrimenti. Catherine is a part of our Facebook community called Make Peace with Food. So, I am a certified counselor and coach who helps women primarily make peace with food and feel confident in their bodies without dieting. So, I work with a lot of folks who have binge eating disorder, who identify as emotional eaters, or who perhaps feel like they are addicted to food, who feel like food has power over them.
Yeah.
And I deal with a lot of people who report body dissatisfaction and body image issues. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, that's my full-time gig, is working mostly one-on-one with clients
Yeah.
in that realm. And I do have some online courses as well to take people through some of these principles. And we will do some group work within those courses. Um, so yeah, I think in a nutshell, that's what I'm up to.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. And something that I felt was so refreshing about you, um, is that you have been very honest. Both, I think maybe I read one of the articles on your blog or heard this in one of your lives, but I know that you sort of in a previous life were a fitness coach
Mhm.
or trainer, however you may put it. And that you kind of engaged in diet culture and maybe, perpetuated it unknowingly before really understanding its harms and its impacts on all of us. So I love that you're honest about that. And tell us, how did you kind of get from point A to point B where you are today? What was that journey like?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I do think a lot of my colleagues tell similar stories of how we, in a previous life, um, inadvertently caused harm. We didn't know better. And so we were helping people lose weight, and
Mhm.
like we didn't see that meal plans and diets were harmful yet. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of grief in that, I think, for my colleagues and I, just feeling feeling I don't know. Yeah, grief, I guess, is the word, that we couldn't help people. But we can now. And when you know better, you do better. And so I worked in the fitness industry as a group fitness instructor and a fitness manager and personal trainer for almost 10 years. And then I went on to become a certified health and wellness coach. And I went to graduate school for counseling because
Mhm.
ultimately I wanted to help people in a more holistic way, and I realized that fitness was only one piece of health. But I also started to pick up on, Catherine, the fact that what we were doing wasn't really satisfying people long term. It wasn't really working. Like, so many women who I worked with, primarily women who were like, would come to me multiple times a week for personal training and take group fitness classes, and they were trying to be so careful about what they ate, and they were never happy in their bodies.
Right. Right. You can
So I
never
was
get
like,
to that point that you want to achieve.
yeah. So
Right.
I was like, there's a bigger
Mhm.
conversation, or a deeper conversation that we need to be having that's not happening in the gym. And that's kind of what led me to evolve my career into what it is now.
Definitely. Wow. Well, thanks for being so honest and transparent about that with your readers and your audience. I think it's so helpful for all of us because there's no perfection in this world. And I appreciate you sharing that journey with us. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, of course.
Yeah, of course. So one thing that you mentioned that you help your clients with a lot is, binge eating and emotional eating. And so I wanted to bring that up because something that, we'll often hear our friends and family say are things like, oh, I can't even keep sugar in the house because I'll have all of it, or fill that in with anything. I can't even keep bread in the house because I'll eat the entire loaf in one sitting if it's in the house, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then kind of, mixed in with that are also folks who say, like when I'm so stressed, I just can't stop eating. Or maybe I'm like, conversely, I'm not interested in food at all when I'm super stressed out. So I think like what we're hearing there, bits and pieces, right, of binge eating or emotional eating. So can you share with all of us kind of, the difference between the two and where each of those, the origins of each?
Yeah, I would love to. So, emotional eating is kind of subjective because everyone's emotional experience is different. But in general, emotional eating is perceived as turning to food as a coping mechanism for emotional rather than physical reasons. However, it is not that simple. And this is one thing that I take people through in my emotional eating mini course, which is to like
Mm,
really start to tease out, um, is it emotional or is it biological? Many
mm,
people who label themselves quote unquote emotional eaters are actually eating out of a biological need for food. And especially for people who fast, do cleanses,
mm,
diets, count, track their food, measure their food, there's always some form of chronic depression going on. So if we are kind of rigid around food, we have a lot of those rules that we talked about before.
yeah.
That deprivation in and of itself can trigger negative emotions, causing you to turn to food essentially to cope with your lack of food.
Right.
So it's like,
One vicious circle. Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
the emotions that are driving you to eat are caused
Right.
by your need to eat.
Right. When we're depriving ourselves of the sustenance that we need.
Yeah, yeah. Oh gosh. And so I think that's like step one is trying to really uncover, like, are you truly like not physically hungry chronically, and are you well nourished in general? Then we could have the discussion of, all right, let's think about a variety of coping mechanisms that we can turn to in addition to food. And it's fine. I mean, food is emotional. Like, it's fine to cope with
Right.
food sometimes.
Right.
And there are moments in which we eat out of emotion rather than physical hunger, and that's also okay.
Yeah.
So I think we have to have compassion for that too. Now
Right.
the
And
different,
especially in this past year, right? I mean,
yeah,
there are so many, parents especially who are super stressed and have been, kind of working from this, like vigilance of their health and their child's health. And we've been dealing with a lot in this world over the past year. And I think a lot of a lot of us have sometimes turned to food, right, during those times, as a coping mechanism. So, yeah, I mean, what would you say about that?
I would say thank goodness you had food. Like, I would
Right,
rather have you cope with food than
right,
with your mind and not cope at all.
absolutely.
And how cool is it that your body has supported you this whole time and it's still here for you?
It's so true. It's so true. We often fail to have that reverence for
Yeah,
our bodies and that, that awe, stand in awe of what they've done for us.
I know. I know. We spend a lot of time at war with our bodies
Mhm.
instead of
Mhm.
in relationship and in reverence of them.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Catherine, emotional eating and binge eating,
Mm.
sometimes people are kind of describing the same experience, but there are some differences. Binge eating disorder is actually recognized in the diagnostic manual now. It's in the DSM-5. So I pulled up the National Eating Disorder Association's definition of binge eating disorder. So I'll just describe that now. And it's on NEDA's website,
Okay.
but binge eating disorder is described as a severe life-threatening and treatable eating disorder characterized by recurrent episodes of eating large quantities of food, often very quickly and to the point of discomfort, a feeling of a loss of control during the binge, experiencing shame, distress, or guilt afterwards.
Mm.
The binge eating episodes are associated with 3 or more of the following: eating much more rapidly than normal, eating until feeling uncomfortably full, eating large amounts of food when not feeling physically hungry, eating alone because of feeling embarrassed by how much one is eating, and feeling disgusted with oneself, depressed, or very guilty afterward. And to meet the criteria, you only need to experience a binge eating episode once a week
Mm.
for, I think it's 3 consecutive months.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
Now, I don't want that to alarm anybody. I'm not diagnosing anybody with an eating disorder. If you're like, I
Yeah.
meet that criteria, like,
Right.
that's not what I'm saying here. I'm not saying that you for sure have an eating disorder. But it's good to have an awareness of, do I fall into any of these patterns of behavior around food? And
Mm.
might I benefit from some professional support? And when you asked about the root cause of both are triggered by dieting a majority of the time.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep. Right. When we're denying ourselves access to this one particular food, of course we're going to crave it more often and then find ourselves sort of out of control when we do get around that particular food.
Of course. And it's not out of control due to lack of willpower. It's
Right.
loss of control because your body is physically starving. It's more
Yeah.
biological at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thanks for, helping to clarify for I think for a lot of people those tend to blend together and so yeah, thank you for helping us distinguish those.
Yep.
Um so there's one thing that oh, and I'll say for people who are watching right now, feel free to put any comments into the chat bar and we will do our best to get to any comments at the end. um one thing that I think sort of like prompted this conversation a little bit that we were talking about, offline was, um, the complexities of there are, so Thinker Blue again serves mostly caregivers who identify as feminists and people who can recognize the harmful impacts of diet culture and fat phobia in our world and can understand how these are rooted in sexism and racism and ableism, right, of achieving this sort of idealized body that's so-called perfect, that most people don't have. And despite that conscious knowledge, there are still, I think, many people in our community who still actively want to change their bodies, because it's been instilled in us for so long. So, how do you sort of see that dynamic, right? Like, I guess, what would you say to parents who are kind of struggling with that?
Mm. with wanting to change their bodies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
While acknowledging, like even though they're still aware of how harmful diet culture is and they don't want to pass that on to their children, and they're doing everything they can not to pass that on to their children, but a part of them still feels like, if I could just, right, like, fit into those jeans or look a certain way.
Yeah. Well, isn't that valid? I mean, I totally get it, right? We live in a society that is safe. It's safer to exist if you're in a smaller body. You
Yeah.
have more access to things if you're able-bodied and thin. So it makes total sense that even if intellectually you know that diet culture is rooted in racism and sexism and the patriarchy, and you understand the harmful effects of diet culture, still, like, it's so deep seated that it makes perfect sense that there's going to be maybe some lingering, like, oh, I still wish I could have my body look this way, or I wish my body could perform in this way, in one way or another.
Yeah.
So how do we rectify that? Yeah, it's layered.
Yeah, it is.
I think I would start by asking, like, what do you want to change about your body and why?
Mm,
And maintain that you have full body autonomy. What you want to do with your body is your choice ultimately, and your
right.
business.
Right.
Um, for some people, changing your body is an act of love. It's a more fuller expression of you. Like, an example might be a gender affirming surgery,
Hmm.
tattoos. For some people, like, that is an
Absolutely.
expression of love
Right.
for their body. And,
Great point.
wanting to change your body too could mean like building strength or
Hmm.
increasing flexibility. And if that comes from a place of wanting the best for oneself, um, then in that case, like, loving your body coexists with wanting to change it.
Right.
Um, but if wanting to change your body is still coming from like, deep down, it's coming from a place of lack of, like, wanting to fit into those jeans or not feeling like enough, like, that not enoughness isn't going to be solved by changing your body. And that's I think the hardest truth to accept is, like, um, any underlying feelings of if there is still some bad body image, or if you're equating, like, weight to self-worth or
Mhm.
self-esteem, like, these problems won't be solved by body
Right.
change.
Right.
So we're better off just starting to address, like, what's underneath that.
Right. Absolutely. Right. We're not going to get anywhere with, um, if we're trying to make ourselves smaller. And I love that you pointed out ways that we might want to change our bodies to show our love for them. That's beautiful. But yeah, if we're trying to make them smaller to fit into uh, idealized body standards, then there's still, I think, the work that we have to do. But I love also that you acknowledged, perhaps even just acknowledging for us that it's normal to feel that way. In the beginning, you said, of course, people feel that way because we're told all of our lives that we're not good enough or that we need to look different. So, of course, we would still be struggling with that today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one practical way to combat that, I think, would be surrounding yourself with body diversity as much as possible. So if you're on Instagram, or even if you want to
Yes.
create, like, a physical vision board for yourself of just different body shapes and sizes, that are, just I think, because if you're constantly seeing bodies that look like yours won't seem like a problem anymore. Like, what is there to change? If you're
Absolutely.
surrounded by bodies that look like yours, or bodies that are perhaps bigger, then it
Hmm.
won't seem like you need to shrink yours if weight loss is the goal, because you're like, I'm fine, like, I fit in. I think the problem is, like, we don't feel like we fit in because all we're exposed to is that very thin
Right.
ideal. That,
Right.
you're right, that's not realistic for the majority of
Right. Right. And even though there are a lot of downfalls to social media, that is one positive element that we can actually create, the feed that we're seeing. We can take a really active role in creating our media. Whereas, when I was in high school, I couldn't.
right.
there was there was no creating. It was, it was 17 magazine or whatever I saw on MTV. Like that was it. I couldn't really go out and find diverse body role model shapes and sizes. Just wasn't really available. So
Yeah.
yeah, there are many downsides to social media, but perhaps that's one
Yeah.
upside.
I
Yeah,
mean, and we can still be triggered out in the world because there are always going to be those magazine covers and things like that. But what is within your control and what is in, like, I guess, you can curate your own feed. And if
mhm,
that keeps you safe, in what,
right,
in that way, then it's worth it.
right.
Because there will be those things outside of your control that you're still going to have to face.
True, very true, very true. Yeah. And I see here a question that says, can you give an example of helping someone with your ideas? And I think that may have been right before you did just give your idea. So
Okay.
feel free to follow up on that here in the comments if there was an additional question. But um, okay, so let's see. Before we get to any other questions and start to wrap up here, I wanted to just ask you something, two like little things just for fun. What's your favorite TV show or movie or book that you're reading right now?
Oh, good question. Um, I'm always reading like 3 books at a time.
I know, I have that problem too. I just blogged about that last week because the books were stacking up and I was like, this is getting to be a problem. But then I thought, well, maybe I can make it into a positive and I'll share it with everybody.
Yes, absolutely. No,
So what
I
books are you reading?
I love the books you posted about. Um, I reread a lot too. I'm rereading Marianne Williamson. I have a couple of her books that I will reread. I'm rereading Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat
Nice.
Phobia.
Okay. Awesome.
But I'm watching on Netflix the show, what's it called? Grownish? No, it's not on Netflix. It's on
Oh
Hulu.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I believe it's a spinoff of Blackish.
Right. Yep. I
Spinoff?
haven't seen it yet, but is it good?
It's good.
Yeah, you'd recommend it to everyone.
I just started it, but
Oh,
so far,
cool.
yes,
Awesome.
it's
That's
been fun.
great. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to tell everyone that if you're interested in joining Maria's Facebook group, it's called Make Peace with Food. I know that a couple of you are already in there. And if you are interested in, getting coaching or, with Maria, you should definitely check out her website, which is, oh, I think we just lost her. Okay. Which is mariascrimenti.com. So as she mentioned, she has a couple of, you know, um, free workshops that are available. And I know that she has one-on-one coaching too. So sorry that we lost you here at the end, Maria. I'm so glad we made this happen. So I want to say a big thank you once again to Maria Scrimenti for joining us today. This was an awesome conversation about making peace with food and making peace with our bodies. For many of us, it's an ongoing, sometimes lifetime journey. Thanks for being here today, and we'll see y'all soon. Okay, take care.